What's up guys, today is my first ever video and today we are going to be making a double-edged short sword out of one of these. This is my first ever video, so click that subscribe button and watch till the end. I promise you, you will not be disappointed.
So since this is a very simple way to build a sword, I first started with taking angle grinder and grinding in the bevels with that. There are a lot of ways you can put in the bevels, but with the method I'm using, this is probably the easiest and the most simple way you can do it. Since I'm just using a flat bar of steel, you can either forge in the bevels or grind them in with a different, like a belt sander or a bench grinder. But I like to use this method because it is very effective, and it also helps you get a nice flat bevel if you know what you're doing. And I've done this method a lot, so it turned out really nice. Like I said, there are a lot of other ways you can do this, but this is probably my favorite way. I started with the base of the blade down towards the tang, just so I can make sure I get the bevels as low as I want them. And then I flipped them around so I could grind in the front or the top bevels of the blade. Since I'm only doing half of the blade at a time and not the full blade, it took me a little bit longer than I thought it would, but not too much. So since I am just using this flat piece of steel, I had to grind in the tip, but I cut it out and then I ground it to shape later on. But so right now you can't see it, but it was put in afterwards. Another reason why I'm just using the angle grinder to grind in the bevels is because the bar of steel I was using has a protective coating on it that would actually be not good to light it up and put it in the forge, so it would have to be ground off anyway. So just using the angle grinder to grind that off plus grind in the bevels just made this process a lot easier and simpler. And since this is a very simple construction, this was just my top choice for this method. So after using the angle grinder, I like to use a belt sander just to give the blade a nice polish up job, because the angle grinder is really good at hogging off a lot of metal, but the belt sander just kind of helps you get the bevels all nice and flat. I'm using an 80 grit sanding belt in this clip, and that's just the one I like to use, whether it's hogging off a lot of metal or doing a nice polish up job after heat treating it. It's just one that I prefer because it gets the job done, but it also makes it look really nice and clean, and so in the end it just looks good. So after you get the blade all figured out, it's time to get working on the handle construction, the guard, and the pommel. Here I'm making the guard out of just a thin piece of steel I had lying around in my scrap bucket. You can use brass, steel. Those are probably some of my favorite things to make a guard out of. They work real nice, but this one I wanted to go for a steel guard and steel pommel construction because it just looks really nice. After you get your holes drilled on the drill press, I usually take a round file, try to smooth out the slot for the tang to fit into. As you can see, it's kind of fighting me a little bit, but it was working pretty good at the beginning. I will switch to the Dremel later on, but I I try to get as much done with the file as I can. Just moving it back and forth. Just trying to widen those holes up and make it all just one big rectangle. Here you can see I switched to the Dremel because the file was just fighting me. So I take a little cutoff wheel I have, and I'm just kind of cutting the little pieces of steel that separate the holes so I can go by later and smooth it all out. Here's where I switch to a little grinding attachment I have on just so I can finish rounding off the edges and kind of smoothing it all out, making sure the tang will fit nice and snug in there. And so, yeah, I'm just grinding off the edges because the cutting wheel cut the steel out, but there was little notches in the side, and I knew they would just catch onto the tang and it wouldn't allow it to go through smoothly. And that's what you want, is it to just slip on so that it will attach nice and snug. Here I go back at it with just a normal file just to make sure everything is nice and smooth and make sure that the sides are flat so that the tang will just be able to slip into that nice and easily. Make sure all the notches and everything are out so it'll fit nice on the tang. After you're done filing, I just go back and make sure the tang will fit nice, see if I need to take any more metal off, but luckily everything fits nice and snug so we can just skip right past that part. Here I'm just kind of doing one final fit up just to make sure everything fits nice and tight before I weld the guard on. As you can see, I make a couple little markings about where the pommel needs to go, but that's for later time.
Alright guys, just did a welded that guard on. Now, we're gonna heat treat this puppy.
When you're heat treating a blade, you really want to get a nice even heat so you don't get a really hot spot in the center of the blade, because that could cause a warp in the blade once you quench it. It could also cause a lot of cracking or just other delaminations. You want to make sure you leave it in there to cool down a lot, because if you pull it out too quickly, you could risk not cooling it down completely, and that will lead to it not hardening right, and then it will just be a disaster later on. After you get done heat treating, it's good to take it back over on the belt sander just so you can get all of the dried oil off that you weren't able to wipe off with a cloth or a paper towel or something. This just kind of helps it keep the blade looking nice and get it all cleaned up so that when you're ready to put your handle on it, you don't have to worry about it then. You don't have to sharpen it right now. You can do that after you put the handle on, but it's just you get the blade all cleaned up and make it look nice and shiny so that after you're done, you can just pop the handle on and you won't have to worry about it later on.
Alright guys, I think I'm gonna wrap it up for the day. We got handle all glued up, pommel and guard are both welded to the blade itself, but yeah, then we just got the handle glued up and letting it dry right now. So yeah, I think we're gonna call for tonight and then come back out here tomorrow and get back to work on the handles. So night, y'all.
So after going over it with the belt sander, sanding down the handle, I go back over it with a hand sandpaper, or just taking an old sanding belt I had that I cut up, and I just run that over and make sure it's all nice and smooth where I want it, make sure the edges are comfortable, just so that it'll fit nice and comfortable in the person's hand, so it's not all blocky and have a bunch of sharp edges when they go to hang on to it. Here I'm using a 120 grit sanding belt that I just cut up just to take a bunch of meat off. Eventually I'll switch to a 160 just to get a nice finer sanding job and make it a lot smoother. This took me not too long as most people would think, but it definitely takes a little bit, and it takes a long time to get good at it. So if you're planning on doing this, I definitely recommend doing a lot of hand sanding afterwards, just to make sure it feels all nice and smooth, because the belt sander does a nice job, but sometimes if you hold it there too long, it can burn the wood, or it just can't reach a specific spot. So I just like going back over and hand sanding just to make sure everything's nice and comfortable the way I want it. Now when you grab the handle after you're done sanding, it should feel nice and smooth in your hand and very comfortable. Now after you got the handle all sanded up the way you wanted, I'm just going back over with a thin piece of leather just to give it a nice leather wrap, just so that it feels more comfortable in the hand and it won't want to slip, and also to give it just a little bit more grip while you're holding the sword. And if you want to swing a milk jug or two, it won't slip out of your hand. This helps just to make it feel more comfortable, also give your hand a little bit more grip on the handle. Plus, it just makes it look really old-fashioned if you know what you're doing, and it makes it look just really cool. The leather I'm using is just a nice thin 1/16 of an inch thick piece of leather that I cut. I have other leather, but this is just the one I like to use because it's very thin and it kind of stretches as it gets wrapped around the handle and just makes it look really nice and tight. It also fits real nice on the handle. You can use glue to secure it more. I'm just using a little bit of super glue, just kind of on the ends, and just wrapping it really tight around the handle, just so it won't come loose. But like I said again, you can use glue if you want to, but I'm just using a little bit of super glue just on the ends, just to make sure that it doesn't come loose as you're swinging it, and just to keep it on there nice and secure.
Alright guys, that is going to wrap up this project. Here is the finished piece. So we got a steel blade with both a pommel and guard welded onto the actual blade itself, and a leather wrapped handle for some extra grip, and then the sheath just slides right on. Alright guys, that's gonna wrap up this video. Thanks for watching till the end. If you like this video, subscribe and stay tuned for the next one. We'll see you then. Peace out.